I learned from Mr. Mahoney, the principal at Winchester High School, I'm actually using his laptop tonight, so he'll be sticking around until we're finished. Be my encouragement to get through this quickly. So good evening. My name is Chris Nixon. I'm the chair of the Winchester School Committee, and I'd like to call to order this public hearing on the FY20 budget. It's a somewhat unusual hearing in that we're having it tonight rather than the end of January. And it's especially unusual since we're looking at two different budgets for the same fiscal year. Two budgets based on two very different funding realities. One is a needs-based budget requiring an operating override in the spring on the ballot, and a second so-called austerity budget that identifies the consequences as best as we can define them today in a no override or no vote scenario, including increased fees, cuts in programs and services, and even staffing reductions. Given our somewhat unusual circumstances tonight, we have broken with tradition of embedding the public hearing in our regular school committee agenda. Tonight, after some introductory presentations from the chair and the superintendent, I will welcome comments from the public. I'd like to offer everyone who wishes it the opportunity to speak. I also need to ensure that the committee has ample time to ask questions of the superintendent and deliberate should there be motions on the two preliminary budgets tonight. Let me also add that while there has been candid and increasing discussion over the need for an operating override, not just since November, but even for years beforehand, it is not the school committee's authority to schedule one. This rests with the select board, who have been gathering information from the superintendent and school committee, the town manager and the finance committee, and department heads. The select board is working hard to understand as best they can the town's needs over the next 5 years, as well as revenue forecasts they can be comfortable with. Last week, the select board determined by unanimous consent that this spring is the right time for an operating override question for Winchester voters. Now they're focused on determining the size of the override as well as the consequences, townwide, of a no vote. With tonight's public hearing, the school committee aims to help the select board bring both of these questions into much better focus. Before we begin, let me acknowledge that we have a regular meeting of the school committee posted tonight for 7:30. I'd like to reassure everyone that this hearing is in fact the main event, if you will, and to accommodate public comment and school committee deliberation, we most certainly will be delaying the start of our regular meeting tonight. That may more likely happen closer to 8:30. So then I'd like to kick off tonight's hearing with a condensed version of a presentation made to fall town meeting on our present and future as a district, and we'll then hand it off to Superintendent Evans for her presentation on preliminary budgets for the next fiscal year. First, beginning on a happy note, this past June, we said congratulations and farewell to 315 graduates of Winchester High School. That's a 17% increase in the number of graduating seniors since my last fall report to town meeting in 2014. I'd like to let that soak in for a moment. 17% growth over 4 years. That's a theme in this evening's presentation and a key factor for the budgets to us to consider tonight. From a space point of view, we are very appreciative of the town's support of critical capital projects that keep pace with our significant growth. 3 new classrooms in the Phase 1 expansion of McCall Middle School were ready to go for the start of school in September. And the connector now encloses and creates a wonderful outdoor classroom space for use in the shoulder seasons. Phase 1 is already fully occupied. The larger Phase 2 project is just now going out to bid and will provide much needed additional classrooms, an expanded cafeteria, additional athletic team rooms and toilets, as well as specialist spaces lost to enrollment growth years ago. We look forward to the project breaking ground sometime this summer and being complete by the fall of 2020. In September, the school committee adopted a new district improvement plan with 6 goals, 4 of them focused on students specifically, and very much at the core of our development of a needs-based budget for FY20. We seek to support and improve our students' social, emotional development and wellness, support instruction that meets the needs of individual learners across all classrooms and grade levels through training and evaluation of existing practices and structures. We support high levels of academic achievement through continuous improvement of teaching and learning in a number of curricular focus areas. We will expand our purposeful efforts to ensure our school culture and climate is a supportive one, welcoming and inclusive for all. Our two new goals for the year include working with the EFPBC and Town Hall to support our school building projects, and last and certainly not least, developing a strategy to ensure sufficient resources for an FY20 needs-based budget next year and for years to come. So this is the segue to that last goal. As we take stock of the budgetary pressures and needs of today and look forward 5 years, it is substantially about our growth. In 2007, Winchester was a district of just under 4,000 students. By 2017, we'd seen over 17% growth in our student population over a period when statewide enrollment continued to fall. Our 2017 master plan projected a 10-year growth rate of nearly 16% by 2026. That's very similar to the previous decade. It's a substantial double-digit phenomenon that sets us apart from most other public school districts in Massachusetts. Last fall, we engaged the University of Massachusetts Donahue Institute in an independent third-party review for a second opinion of our 5 and 10-year enrollment growth forecast. The team reviewed projections in light of regional population growth, job sector growth, personal wage growth, and trends in transportation, housing demands, and availability. The Donahue Institute found enrollment in Winchester is expanding in response to underlying dynamics of population and job growth in Massachusetts and the Boston area. The Commonwealth has become the fastest growing state in the Northeast, and Winchester is growing at a faster pace than both. Jobs growth in the very places where Winchester residents work has been increasing faster than the nation and other parts of the Commonwealth. Nearby opportunities in finance, technology, and healthcare, all within commuting distance from Winchester, are adding to the town's appeal for highly educated workers, further stimulating population growth. And finally, in considering Winchester's residential development trends, the Donahue Institute determined that the town's development pipeline further supports a scenario of future growth, with the master plan's enrollment projections to be squarely on track with regional demographic and economic trends. Excuse me. So with this 2017 growth projection now 2 years old, how have we been doing? Well, in fact, we are growing at a rate of almost 3%, and we are on track over a 10-year period to reach, I think, 15.4%, so we're nearly on target for what we projected 2 years ago. We've grown by 132 K-12 students over the past 2 years. Steady growth in families and in-migration through home sales contribute to our steady increase in our school population, but so too does pending subdivision activity on Upper Forest Street associated with the Leggett-McCall development in Woburn or the proposal on Highland Avenue. We continue to see townwide demolition permits issued at between 20 to 25 per year, which is considered conservatively to support the 40 and 35 additional housing units projected in the 5 and 10-year timeframes. Our planning department has noted that most of the demo permits are issued for 2 and 3 bedroom properties, yielding 4 and 5 bedroom homes as well as multifamily. Given that most demo properties have no children present as they have aged out, development with more bedrooms has a compounding effect in terms of school-age children. It was not clear to us in the spring of 2017 if the rezoning of our central business district was generating housing, and therefore it was not accounted for in the school facilities master plan. But with the passage of time, we can now see and measure new housing in the CBD. The first multi-use redevelopment project with housing units has since been completed, and larger projects are coming. In October, the first hearing was held for a 32-unit development proposal at Main and Vine. Up to 10 new housing units are expected at the development of 735 Main Street, and a 14-unit project on Elmwood was permitted earlier this year and is now under construction. Our ZBA has approved the 96-unit 40B project on Cambridge Street and the Waterfield project originally understood as 50 micro units with little student enrollment impact, is now expanded in size and scope to be up to 75 units, including 2 bedrooms, which may yield 30 to 40 students. And finally, this fall, Winchester's Select Board approved our new housing production plan, which seeks so-called safe harbor status, and it commits us to the 0.5% or 40 affordable housing units per year towards our fulfillment of the state-mandated 10% 40B goal. So, with this backdrop of our unique and sustained growth, we look to the spring for an operating override that gets us caught up with the constraints of enrollment, not just in maintaining our class size guidelines, but in identifying and implementing thoughtful and much-needed program improvements and new initiatives over the next 3 to 4 years. These may include expansion of world language to lower grades, or providing full-time teaching aides in our all-day kindergarten program, just to name a couple. The superintendent will speak to this in more detail shortly. Additional resources will permit us to meet the needs of our growing student body, which may include opportunities for our middle school students in the visual and performing arts, or expanded athletics programming. Our ongoing curriculum reviews in math and science also point to much needed investment. And of course, we must remain competitive in the labor market so that we can attract and retain the best teachers and staff. Recognizing that salaries make up such a significant portion of the school budget, how does our per pupil spending measure up against our peer districts? I know that it will come as no surprise to some of you in the room tonight that we are at the bottom of this list. But let me be clear that while the school committee would be thrilled to have the resources of a Weston or a Lincoln or a Wellesley, a spring override will not put us on the top of this heap. At best, we will leapfrog Westford, but in the end may only trade places with Belmont. Let's look at how Winchester's per pupil spending stacks up against the state as a whole. Some of you here tonight have heard us say for years that we spend less than the state average, and this remains true today. But if you take a closer look at our trend line, you'll see that the gap is actually widening each year. This is not sustainable. For FY17, the most recent year for which statewide figures are available from DESE, our per pupil spending was some $2,400 below the state average, which was at our level 5 years prior in 2012. So, how can we support the present needs of students and invest in their future when our funding levels are from a page in the past? This question drives the development of Budget 1 tonight, a needs-based budget for FY20 that will require an override in the spring. And what's the alternative? Based on last night's Select Board meeting and their consensus on the use of free cash in the event of a no vote in the spring, the superintendent has developed a so-called austerity budget, which we will also see tonight. Given the limited time between a spring ballot question and spring town meeting, which must be prepared as a body to vote a budget for FY20, this austerity version is difficult to imagine, but it's a necessary evil. I'll end my remarks tonight the same way I ended them at town meeting in November, with a quote from Mark Twain I found in the gift shop this past summer visiting his Connecticut home, where he penned many of the classics that we and our children have read. And I'll suggest to you tonight that all we need to do to affirm Twain's thinking on greatness is simply to follow the mission of the Winchester Public Schools, and that is to provide all students with an outstanding education in a nurturing and yet challenging environment that fosters academic achievement, healthy social and emotional development, enthusiasm for education, and a lifelong love for learning. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to hand it now over to Dr. Judy Evans, Superintendent of Schools, to speak to 2 budget presentations this evening. Judy.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming tonight to learn more about the choices that we'll have before us in the coming months regarding the use of available funds. And I would first like to thank the Finance Committee, the Select Board, and the members of the School Committee for working very hard for the past few months to try to determine what our needs will be for FY20 and to determine what kind of an override we will be asking voters to approve in the spring should that be necessary. It has become clear in the last few years as presented at town meeting, that we've come up against a structural deficit where we simply cannot raise enough local funds to support school and municipal needs, and that we need to ask the taxpayers to give us additional resources so that we can maintain existing services and make modest program improvements. So you'll see two budgets tonight. The first is a proposed needs budget. That's an 8.4% increase over the current fiscal year. In recent years, district budgets have focused on meeting growing enrollment in mandated services related primarily to special education and English language learners. Those programs and services for mandated classes, teachers, support staff, out-of-district tuition and transportation have really meant that we haven't been able to move forward on many initiatives. And each year, I present a list to the school committee and to the public of what we have determined to be unmet needs or future initiatives that have been deferred. And so this budget places many of those deferred initiatives before you so that you can give us some feedback around whether these in fact align with what our district goals are trying to achieve. And it also is a budget that's developed with the recognition that these initiatives cannot all be accomplished in a single year. So I think the important thing to note about any choice related to an operating override is that it is permission to tax at a higher rate, but not all of those funds are spent in the first year, that they're spent over a number of years, and that the tax bills don't go up in the first year necessarily as might be inferred if you know how much the operating override is asking for. The town meeting approves the budget, the Finance Committee reviews it, and what gets approved in May is certainly something that gets a lot of scrutiny. Funding shortfalls have led to some challenges for us. While we've been able to maintain class sizes at a reasonable level from K to 5, from 6 through 12, any of you who teach or have students in our schools know that those class sizes have been creeping up, that we cannot offer all the electives that we'd like to offer, that we have many students sitting in study halls because we simply have no classes to offer them. And so those deferred initiatives you'll see in this budget include additional programs over the next 3 years at the middle and high school level that will address some of those issues. This budget is also about 3.5% higher than our typical budget, which is somewhere in the 4.5 to 5.5 range for the last few fiscal years. So the FY19 approved budget is about $50 million. This override budget, this needs-based budget, is proposed at $54 million. It's a 8.46% increase. And most of that is personnel. Most of our budget is personnel. There are really two categories of increase here. One is new personnel, new teachers and support staff members. I'll go through what the proposed additions will be. And the other is net salary adjustments, which includes step and lane changes, projected contract settlements, and wage adjustments for all of our employees. On the expense side, the additions include $476,000 for special education, tuition, and transportation. Those are for our 50 to 60 students each year who have to go out of district because we don't have programs to meet their needs. I am really proud of Pam Gerard and our staff of special educators who've built robust in-district programs, but simply those programs cannot meet the needs of every child, and some of these placements are very expensive. Moving forward, we believe we'll need nearly $500,000 more to support those students. There's a small amount for additional in-district regular transportation, some $167,000 for supplies and materials, primarily additional curriculum materials, some science materials, some materials for mathematics, some materials for use by teachers. We really have level funded most of those accounts for several years. So this is a modest ask for some program improvements related to curriculum. And finally, technology, which includes technology infrastructure, servers and switches, projectors. Many of our projectors are quite old and on their last legs, and replacement devices on a multi-year cycle for both students and teachers. So on the expense side, the ask is about $858,000 for an increase. The additional mandated personnel for special education includes those listed here. Some of these are for our specialized program, our K-5 program for autism spectrum disorder students, expanded teaching support for some identified students. Those are teacher assistants, and a functional behavioral teacher for the high school related to increases in enrollment in 2 programs there. On the K-5 front, under this override budget, we'd look for an additional enrollment-related classroom teacher to be determined, depending on primarily kindergarten registration. A math coach for K-5 to support teachers, to lead curriculum review, to model lessons. We have a literacy coordinator, and it would be helpful to have someone running that effort on the math front as well. In addition to our support for academics, we've been gradually increasing supports for wellness through the wellness coordinator we added a couple of years ago, a district-wide adjustment counselor, social emotional coach, and we'd like to add another one. In the end, we'd love to have 1 adjustment counselor at each of our 5 elementary schools, so we would ask to phase that over time. And finally, you might remember the town generously funded a bridge program to support the transition to all-day kindergarten. That was tuition-free for our students. It's been a very successful program. All of our students are in full-day kindergarten 5 full days a week. We only have half-time aides in those classrooms, and we'd gradually like to move toward having full-time aides, instructional assistants. Kindergarten classrooms are busy places, as you might imagine. Many of our students come to us with a wide range of developmental readiness for kindergarten, and having 2 sets of hands in the classroom can really enhance their experience, their learning, and their growth. On the middle school front, well, we would like to increase electives and reduce class size in some of the electives. So over time, we'd like to add physical education support, establish a drama performing arts program with the first implementation of a half-time teacher moving to full-time the following year, adding to our technology education program, and adding an instructional coach as we did at the elementary level. The directors, who primarily are all high school folks, do a great job supporting the middle school, but there's no building-based person. We'd like to start with a half-time person in the second year, make that full-time. And finally, something I've been advocating for a long time, which is expansion of world language to 6th grade. In all my previous districts, world language started in 5th grade. I was shocked and disappointed to find that we start in 7th grade. I certainly think we should at least start in 6th grade, and that we need to add a non-Western spoken language, possibly Mandarin. We also have large class sizes, if there are any world language teachers here in the middle school, and we'd like to add a little bit of support for that to bring down some of those large class sizes. On the high school front, we need more teachers. 1,400 students plus at the high school next year means that some of our classes are overcrowded, or students can't simply fit them into their schedules because there aren't enough sections. We'd like to establish a performing arts department, starting with a part-time teacher, moving to full-time over 2 or 3 years, support more physical education and health, again, over a few years, and add additional teachers for core subjects. Right now, a lot of our students take more than 1 mathematics or science class. That makes it very challenging for us to ensure that we have sufficient teachers to offer those classes that our students would like to see. And finally, the last ask is at the district level for personnel. It would be a technology director. Several years ago, before I came on board, due to budget concerns, we eliminated the technology director position. It really is badly needed in order to ensure that we're using our resources well, that we're planning for infrastructure improvements, and that we're supporting software and digital learning. On the expense side, this is the plan for implementing increases in some of these categories over the next 3 years. So some of the things we're looking for are leveled readers for our K-5 students, elementary science materials, general curriculum materials, and then an allocation for furniture and rugs. Lots of our classrooms are running on furniture that's 20 or 30 years old, and It's worn out, it's past its useful life, and so we need a small allocation to try to replace some of that furniture over time. And finally, probably not in FY20, but FY21, we'd like to add a late bus to the middle and high school to support students who are participating in after-school activities so that they could get home safely. So the phasing that I mentioned earlier, this is just a summary of how over the next couple of fiscal years, we'd like to add staff to reach our goal of having more elementary instructional coaches, more adjustment counselors, and full-time kindergarten aides. At the middle school, again, we'd like to have a full-time instructional technology specialist, a full-time drama person, full-time instructional coach, and then at the high school, a full-time PE person, full-time drama person, and then a dean of students. 2 assistant principals and a principal do a great job here, but that's the same number of administrators we had when we had 300 or 400 fewer students. There's a lot to manage, and if we're going to ask our principals and assistant principals to be instructional leaders, we need another administrator at the high school. The other piece of the pie is revenue. The only revenue that we can control would be tuition and fees. So the categories of fees that we currently have that school committee will need to discuss would be preschool tuition, music lesson fees, which have not increased for many years, athletic fees, which have increased regularly, and our transportation fee for both for regular transportation and for the students who get transported to after-school programs. So that's the needs-based budget that we hope will be funded through an override. There'll be lots of discussion between now and town meeting in May. We will continue to monitor our enrollment and special education costs as our kindergarten class enrolls in the next couple of months. We have budget advisory group meetings with the finance committee, subcommittee, and we hope that the select board will place an override vote for consideration in March, and then that the some funding will be provided to support some of this needs-based budget in May. So that's the 8.46% increase. If you want to take a look at, oops, hang on a second. Dennis, I may need you to sign in again, sorry. So the next budget that you're going to see is what we're calling the austerity budget, and it includes very little of what you just saw, unfortunately. So the FY20, what we're calling reduction budget, is, thanks Dennis, is what is also known as an austerity budget, but austerity really implies to me you are doing your best to make the best of a bad situation, and that's what really we would try to do at a 3.8% increase. We have not seen such a small increase for many years in Winchester, and this is obviously a situation that will require some very hard choices. So if an override were not scheduled or failed to pass, what the town manager and the finance committee and the select board think will be available for resources would be enough to fund a 3.8% increase to the school department budget. So you can see that our personnel needs will take up about $2.4 million. Some of that is new special education personnel that we have to hire regardless of what our budget allocation is. And so that puts pressure on the overall budget because special education is a mandated service. So the shortfall that we were looking at in creating this shortfall budget is a $762,000 reduction in personnel and $227,000 in expense. That's a net reduction that slightly under $1 million. So the only positions that will be added in the district next year, if this budget is funded, would be the minimum number of staff members we need to support special education. So these are the positions that will be added. An autism spectrum program teaching assistants, general teaching assistants for identified students where it's in their IEPs, and then a teacher at the high school for the 2 of our specialized programs shared between those programs. As I mentioned in the 8.46% increased budget, there are also projected increases in out-of-district transportation and tuition that will require nearly $500,000 increase in the personnel and the expense side. So how do we reach a $1 million cut from our minimum needs in our budget. It really is something that will require a lot of hard thought and decision-making, but in the end, it really is about personnel. And so at a 3.8% increase, we'll be eliminating 15 to 18 FTE teacher salary positions, whether those are administrators, clerical, support staff, teachers, or specialists, to save $712,000 from our budget. We'd also have to consider other things we support. The district supports instrumental lessons to the tune of $50,000. Whether those are eliminated or pushed on to the parents through increased fees is a decision that the school committee will have to consider. We also supplement the after-school childcare buses that go to the rec center and the Chinese school to the tune of about $115,000. We could eliminate those or pass the cost on to parents. We could reduce the athletic budget. If we cut the athletic budget by 20%, that could include reduction of sports teams, elimination of some contests, or increased fees, or some combination thereof. And finally, a small reduction in supplies and materials would mean that our funding for books and paper and pencils would be the same this year and next year. It means no new books, no new series, no additional materials for the new students, stretching ourselves very thin. The impact of a budget that doesn't meet our needs, that is an austerity budget, really will be seen almost immediately, but certainly over time, both on the staffing side and on the expense side. So if we were to have staffing reduction, it might come from reading or intervention specialists or elementary classroom sections. Our elementary class sizes are very reasonable, but the middle school and high school class sizes in general are not, and so there's not a lot of room to decrease staff at those levels, except for parts of positions. It means more study halls, 6 through 12, because we aren't able to add enrollment-related staff, fewer elective offerings, larger class sizes, and limited technology support. On the expense side, it could mean no bus transport to Mystic School, Chinese School, or Sarah, K-8 instrumental music lessons reduced or fully supported by families, athletic teams or contests reduced or fees increased, only textbook replacements, no new supplies, and no new furniture and rugs. All of those things are included or phased in over FY 20, 21, and 22 in the override proposed budget. So the impact of the personnel requests not being funded K to 5 really will be seen over time in terms of larger class sizes, fewer interventionists, less teacher professional development and growth, no additional staffing for social emotional needs, and no kindergarten aid increase, only half-day support for the aides. At the 6 through 12 level, there may be some courses that will not run due to lack of staffing, and some of the similar impacts as we see at K-5, no technology support in the middle school, no world language expansion. And we have 2 special education requests that will be deferred to FY21 in terms of improving existing programs. The technology director position, if we push it out a year, is something that other central office administrators are trying to support, but again, having one person responsible for technology in most districts of nearly 4,800 students is much more typical than our district that has no technology director. And we talked about the fees. One fee we don't currently charge is an activity fee. We could implement an activity fee. That would be a new fee for students at, say, at the high school. There aren't really any other fees that we can charge as a district that would be able to be used to offset expenses related to our budget. So where do we go from here? I started with the optimistic needs-based presentation, which I always do every year, knowing that we make cuts even before that initial budget gets put forward, and we did the same thing this year. And I've put forward an austerity budget that is going to have some significant impacts. And so one of the things that out of the control of the superintendent and the school committee is whether an override question gets placed on the ballot. That's really a select board decision, and we have to trust the process. We expect that discussion and vote on whether an override will be placed will happen soon, and that we can try to keep the public and our parents and our teachers well informed about the process in the coming weeks. At this point, that concludes the 2 budgets that we've developed and the impacts of each. And I think that we will open it for public comment or question at this time. So thank you very much.
Very much, Judy.
Thank you.
It's typically when we have our public hearing at Parkhurst, it's always Karen Connolly and then maybe one other person. So it's exciting, and I'm happy to see how many people are here tonight. Some of you maybe are here just to listen in on what the discussion is about, but if any of you do have comments or questions for the committee, I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity to come forward. So at this time, I'd like to open it up. This is a public hearing. So if any of you are here, you have questions, you have comments, Judy, we have 2 microphones down here, is that right? So feel free to come on down. If you've got a question or comment, we would just ask that you introduce yourself and try to keep your comments or questions to 2 or 3 minutes. Who'd like to go first? I was not expecting this. Okay, so the way, let me just say, please come up, because what I want to be clear about, the way this works, okay, so the way, let me just say, please come up, because what I want to be clear about, the way this works is because we have other activity scheduled in this hearing, we have some deliberation, we want to talk to the superintendent.
Hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
So I appreciate all the work that has gone into this, so thank you all very much. I hope it's okay to ask a clarifying question on those 2 last bullet points up there about the possible override vote in March and then the annual town meeting in May. I just wanted to make sure I understand that the March vote would be by the select board to put the override on. So maybe you should just clarify instead of me trying to restate.
Sure, I'll do my best, and in fact, the chair of the select board is here, so I'm going to, Lance, if I misspeak, please let me know and correct me. So the March question, we're talking about a March, the spring election, there will be a ballot. The select board's decision is whether or not to place an operating override on the ballot. However, by charter, the select board has to make these decisions, well in advance, as you can expect. So notification has to go out to the town. Ballots have to be printed and so forth. My sense, Mr. Grinzebach, is outside of any discussion of a special town meeting, a select board decision on placing an override on the spring ballot. I think you all have been talking about a hard stop at the end of January. Is that about right? I see a nod, yes. So that's really the timeline.
If I can ask one more question. So for, parents especially, but people who want to support the override, how can we best demonstrate that for you as soon as possible?
Well, I'm going to ask my colleagues here at the table to chime in with their thoughts. I want to underscore something Judy just said. The select board, I know, is taking this very seriously. So I'm one of many that I wish we were in a position where we knew that there was an override for sure. We knew how much it was, that we could sort of articulate that to the community. As I said in my opening remarks, it's an important decision for the select board to make. So I think this is a group that needs to be really clear on what the needs are, as clear as they can be, with great help from the Finance Committee on revenue forecasts. So they don't want to miss the mark. I mentioned on Thursday the select board discussed many options around timing for an override. There had been some other suggestions, a question in June, a question in November. The school committee, the superintendent, and the leadership team felt strongly that that wasn't really going to help us in terms of the staffing issues that you heard tonight. So certainly I'm pleased that the select board, through unanimous consent, said if there's going to be an override, it's going to be in the spring. So I took that very positively. I know that the select board will continue to discuss this. Certainly, you all can reach out to your 5 elected representatives. I would just caution you and say I don't want to swamp them to the point that they don't get their work done. So each board has a public comment period at their meetings. Might be appropriate, and again, Lance can speak up if otherwise. Perhaps you could reach out to the chair through email. That's been our practice with the school committee if citizens feel strongly about something. And management might circulate your comments to the board. Does that seem reasonable? Judy?
A couple of other suggestions I think that might be helpful. One is that I've been asked by most of the parent organizations to come and speak in the next month or 6 weeks. Encouragement of parents and community members to come to those meetings and ask specific questions about the budget what will happen in terms of an austerity budget and an override budget, that piece would be, I think, helpful, attendance at those meetings. School committee is meeting regularly. We'll have another meeting in 2 weeks, and budget will certainly be on the agenda, encouraging people to come and hear what's going on, come to the meetings, ask questions, make public comment. That's also helpful. Once an override vote is determined that it is going to take place, our capacity to speak and encourage people one way or another is pretty limited. We can inform, we can educate, we can answer questions, but really an outside force is needed to help support any educational efforts around the wider community. I think it's also important to note that I presented the school side of the need. The municipal side is as dire in terms of public services, in terms of fire, police, municipal, capital improvements, all long deferred. We've been given as much to support our students as the town could reasonably give us. There's no pot of gold that people can dip into. There's no waste. This is the most incredibly efficient operation, both on the school side and on the town side, that I've ever seen. And so I think we're getting great value and great results, but it's not sustainable. We just have a structural deficit. And so the override will include an increased budget both for the school side and for the town side to add fire and police and other needed DPW, other needed services. And so advocacy for this is not just supporting the students who sit in our classrooms every day, but also everyone who lives in Winchester.
Well said, and can I just also pick up on that point about advocacy? So my colleague, Ms. Radicchio, and I have started a website just on our own accord. It's an informational website. It's not an advocacy website. So once the select board makes a decision about how much, and for sure, we look forward to making that available, again, as an informational tool, much like what you're seeing tonight. My expectation, Judy, is that just as we've done with other presentations in the past, we can have the 846, the 38 presentations perhaps up on the district website. My remarks we will put up on the website. And soon, should the select board take action, any sort of collection of information we would make available as well. Other questions or comments tonight for us? Please come up. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I will echo Rebecca's appreciation and recognition of all your hard work, and thank you for your service to the town. My name's Jessica Zander. I have a question. It's a clarifying question, which is that there were a number of partial FTEs referenced, and so I'd love you to explain the implications of those in future budgets and how revenue projections fit into that.
Right. So
Thank you.
I think that's a great question. So initially, when we worked to develop our needs-based budget, it came in closer to 10%, and a lot of those part-time teachers were full-time teachers in the initial ask. And when we looked at what was likely to be available in an override and what the impact would be on the tax rate of a 10% ask or a nearly 10% ask, we pulled back a little and tried to ramp up some of the costs over 2 or 3 years. And so in some cases, there's an existing part-time position that a 0.6 or a 0.4 person could add to make that a full-time job. In other areas, it is more difficult to attract and retain part-time people, but at least we would be making some inroads and developing some programs. Many of those additions are to support, say, physical education where the class sizes are just too large, or technology. We had a 0.4 position this year we couldn't fill. It's a very specialized position at the middle school. We're looking to add 0.6 to that to attract a full-time person. And so each position is slightly different, but what we're hoping to do is gradually over the next 3 or 4 years, get to the staffing level that we think our students need. And as our enrollment continues to grow, next year the middle school will be at least 50 more students than this year. We will have similar enrollment-related asks for regular classroom teachers as well. And so trying to determine what our budget needs are going to be next year, the year after, as you can imagine, is complicated. But what we're trying to do by having some of these part-time positions is ramp it up a little bit so that the impact is not all felt in the first year. Right, right. It is a cumulative impact over time for increased staffing, for sure.
Hi, Janice Jens, and again, I echo thank you so much for your hard work. Just a few quick questions. Will you make your presentation available?
My plan is tomorrow to send all 3 presentations to all parents and teachers, so everyone will have all of the same information. We're trying to be as transparent as possible about what we're asking for and why, and what our needs are, so that at each of the forthcoming school committee meetings or superintendent chats that people can come and ask for more detail.
Okay, thank you. And the other question might be more for Lance, but the other departments asking for money, will they also be making a presentation or making information available? And related to that, I assume this is an all or nothing. We either vote for everything or we will vote for nothing. They're all bundled together.
Lance,
we
being
have
a
2
friend of the committee,
scenarios.
I'd love for him to answer the question, if we can put him on the spot.
Excuse me, Lance, did you
Lance, thank
say
you.
the town meeting may approve part of that budget? Did I hear you say that?
Lance, can I ask you to come to the mic? Yeah. I just want you to come to the mic in case the area mic's not picking you up.
Very useful information.
The town budget process is the town manager and the departments, and Dr. Evans put together their budget. The town manager reviews that. The town manager then sends that to the FinCom on February 15th. The Finance Committee reviews that. They come up with their own budget, which might be higher or lower, shift things around. And the final say is up to town meeting. It's town meeting sets the budget, and if town meeting decided they wanted to add more or less, they could certainly do that at that time.
So they can change it. They don't have to
definitely
do
can
yay
change
or
it. Yeah,
nay. They can,
We're not, unfortunately, we're not the last word.
okay,
So,
that's a
yeah.
really important
Town
point.
meeting can change it, but we can't spend more than we have available in the tax levy.
Mhm.
And can I
Okay.
just offer, with the leadership of FinCom sitting behind you and not wanting to feel left out, so typically, the school committee votes our budget at the end of January. As Lance said, the town manager prepares a townwide budget by mid-February. That includes the school piece. In years past, sometimes the town manager's budget included the same number we voted, sometimes not. Both pieces of information go to the finance committee. 15 extremely dedicated people with a thankless job who are not only scrubbing what the town manager puts forward, what the superintendent puts forward, what we vote. They meet with the department heads, the police chief, the fire chief, etc. It is, in fact, we call it the yellow sheet. The finance committee, the actual budget, there has to be a budget that town meeting entertains.
Mhm.
As a town meeting member, what is it I am to vote? It's actually a recommendation that comes from the finance committee. But, to your question, there is a parliamentary process on the floor of town meeting that gives that body the authority to change its mind. And in fact, in this very spot, last spring, there was a motion on the floor to give the schools a little more money. That did not happen, for good reasons, based on the needs elsewhere in the town. So it is unusual for town meeting to make a change, and when those changes have been made, they frankly have been pretty small.
Yay or nay, up or down. They can go either way.
Generally speaking, I think when it's changed, and I'll look to others at the table if my memory's foggy, I think town meeting in the past has entertained small increases to the budget because
Okay.
a department head has come forward and said, look, this is a really difficult consequence. I
Okay.
can't remember a time when town meeting cut it.
Okay.
As Lance was mentioning earlier,
great.
though, this notion of coming to a special town meeting
Mhm.
in February is not about voting a budget. That is simply an informational presentation. Town meeting is 192 elected people, our friends and neighbors. They represent the whole town. And it is important in the minds of, I think, some on the select board. I certainly appreciate it myself as a town meeting member. It's a good opportunity to present to this elected body what the plan is, get their feedback, get their questions before we move forward. So that has nothing to do with, approving the budget. That would actually then happen after the March election. By charter, town meeting cannot act on financial articles until till May, right? So we would expect the budget could be voted sometime the end of the first week of May at the earliest. But when we think about when the spring election would be, that's just such a short time frame. This is why the austerity budget is so important. If there's a no vote on an override, there simply isn't time for all of the people who hold these responsibilities to quickly come up with some alternative. There's period. And there's similarly no time for our friends on the finance committee to scrub that and come up with any position.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions tonight? Please come forward. Hi, Stacy.
My name's Stacy Princey. I appreciate all that you guys have done as well. And I know that Dr. Evans is coming to the Lynch Parents Association tomorrow night, so those of you at home who aren't here tonight, you can come tomorrow and hear this and ask specific questions. But at a previous meeting that we were at, Judy, you mentioned that if the override doesn't pass, that people like me with multiple students in the schools could end up paying the same or more in the increased fees or new fees. Could you talk on that a little bit so that people understand?
Sure. So this is a school committee discussion that happens every year. Ideally, we would prefer to have schools operate the way they did when I was in public school, which is no fees. Right now, our parents pay quite high fees for bus transportation, for athletics, for music lessons, if you have students in preschool, tuition. And so when it comes down to making a tough decision, like are we cutting sub-varsity sports, are we reducing contests, or are we increasing athletic fees? The fees that we would have to charge would probably double the current fees in order to make up the difference. But if we have to make a choice between 2 classroom teachers and a co-curricular program, that's a hard choice. And there will certainly be feelings on both sides about what's most important. To me, it's all important. and to have to make these cuts, particularly of personnel, is heartbreaking. And so a couple of things I think, I'm not an expert on municipal finance or overrides, but having been through this in several other districts, the hard message for people to hear is that as the chair of the select board has reminded us, every certain number of years, we need to come to the voters and say, can we tax you at a higher rate so that we can have the services in schools we want? And that question usually comes with a big dollar amount, but that dollar amount covers a number of years, and how many years it covers really is dependent on how fast we grow in the next few years and what the other municipal needs are. And so when people are considering whether to vote on an override question about how much we should support public education, they really, I think, need to be informed about how much that will affect their taxes over time and not just all at once. And so that's where the ramp up comes. That's why we're asking not for everything we need in our needs-based budget, but over time, so that it is a little more palatable. And so when you're looking at a question on a ballot that's a large dollar amount, and it could impact your taxes and will impact your taxes, it's important to note that that hit doesn't come all in the first year or the second year or the third year, it's over time. So someone said, how can we be helpful? I would say share that message to your friends and neighbors that the consideration is not for all of the money to be spent in the first year. And we don't want to come back and ask you every single year for an override, and that would obviously not be great financial planning on our part. So, so that would be helpful to us.
Other comments or questions from the audience tonight? Hi.
I think most of you know me. I'm Bob Kuszewski. One of the questions that I have is about the override. So it might not be for you, it might be for the select board. In 2000 and 2008, those overrides were very, very quickly bonded out from here to infinity. And they were used for capital expenses, and capital expenses really only. This override from your presentation sounds like it's for ongoing day-to-day expenses of paying for teachers and whatnot. How are you going to prevent, when we put this article before the town, us from bonding this out forever and making it so that you don't have the resources that you're requesting here today?
So I appreciate the question, and I'm sorry that Lance thought he had the night off, because I'm going to start to answer it, and I'm still going to put him on the spot in just a moment. My understanding, Bob, is perhaps it was 2000. I believe statute requires us, when we go for an override, to indicate, at least in the coming fiscal year, how it will be allocated, how it will be spent. As you know, no one board or committee can bind the hands of the future. So this is why the school committee will not vote an FY21 budget. We will not vote an FY22 budget, because that's not our responsibility. Next year's school committee will take up 21. When what Judy is talking about, the reason we're just talking about operating stuff is because this is what the charter calls on us to do in January. We're a little ahead of schedule by about 3 weeks. But in order to prepare for a budget vote in the spring, we're talking about the operating stuff. And as a town meeting member, as you know, we pick up the capital stuff in the fall. So we're busy talking about those one-time expenses. Some of them are large, and we do bond them out, like the Vincent Owen School, this beautiful high school. But in fact, the conversation about the override as a whole, what does it support? The concept is actually substantially supports operating expenses, but in addition, an infusion of cash into our stabilization funds for capital. To date, the conversation has been around about $2 million towards capital. I could go into the weeds with you about the other elements of that might change the way we currently do business with returning debt and so forth and reversions. I won't tonight. But Lance is here, and I think it would be appropriate, because this is not really a school committee wheelhouse issue. Could you speak to a moment, Lance, for that piece about sharing operating capital?
Yeah, the 2000 override, I will double check when I get home, and I'll eat my words tomorrow morning, but that was an operating override. So all the money went into the operating side. There was an amount, a little bit less than $2 million out of that total, these things that were then transferred by town meeting into the capital and building stabilization funds. but the rest of it all went into operations, and so did the 2008. So this is it. This the state is rather hard-nosed about overrides. You're required to specify exactly how much you're asking for in total and how you're going to spend the first year of it at least. And for an operating override, that has to be specified for the kinds of operations we're talking about here, school uses. So it doesn't disappear into bonded debt projects. Those are separate.
And can I also just clarify, Bob and others, these are the two pieces of the override. A substantial piece for operating and a smaller piece for capital and nothing else. So I don't want others in the audience to think, wait a minute, they were talking about operating, now there's this other thing, what else are we not hearing about? Let me explain why the capital piece is so important. We don't have, just as we struggle to find the resources to run the district and for various departments in the town to meet the needs that we expect, we don't have the resources in our capital and building stabilization funds to meet the needs of the town. A perfect example, and it's not a schools issue, is that because of federal FCC rules, municipalities are losing their channels on their emergency radios. Our police chief and our fire chief have been asking for 4 or 5 years to tell us we're going to need to replace our radios. That seems like a pretty reasonable request, doesn't it? It does to me. We don't have the resources in our stabilization funds to buy the new radios in 1 year. We're having to actually stretch out that purchase over 4 years. And we're going into, Brian, it's the second year. Is that right? We're going into the second year. So if that override's not successful, and the select board really is the party to talk more about this, but part of the discussion will be, are there resources that go into capital currently we need to pull back for other important needs? Might we cut the fire and police departments off at the knees and they get half the radios they need? As an example. We've got windows that need to be replaced in elementary schools. We've got air conditioning systems that are failing at the library and so forth. My colleague Brian serves on the Capital Planning Committee, and Brian, throughout the summer, you hear from department heads with long lists of what needs to be accomplished.
We saw $20 million worth of requests for this fiscal year alone. We could only fund a little under $2 million of it. And then over the next 5 years, there were $66 million in requests. Obviously, the $2 million, less than $2 million that we have, does not eat away at that. It grows faster. The needs grow faster than the ability to fund them. So, exactly. That's how we Yes.
Right.
I won't get into the weeds, but I could easily get into the weeds.
Brian and I are eager to get into the weeds with you after the fact, as you can tell. It's a great question. Any other comments or questions for us tonight? Come on up, Ms. Carney. Welcome.
Carney, District 2, Town Meeting Member. What is the status of Morocco and Lynch being built? And would this operating override push these two projects back further? And would overrides be considered or needed for these two projects in the future?
Great question. Thank you. So Morocco and Lynch, just like, for instance, the Vincent Owen School, the expansion that we're about to start at McCall, or this project, these are what we call capital projects. They're not operating projects. And so the way we have funded large capital projects like VO, like Phase 2 of McCall, certainly like the high school, are through what we call debt exclusion overrides. So these also go to the voters, you will recall. These are not permanent tax increases. I say that with a wink because, just like a mortgage on your house, it takes a while to pay off. So the town typically, depending on the size of the project, could bond a large capital project anywhere from 50 to 20 years. So the operating component, Sue, of this request would not go towards a new Lynch or Morocco. And similarly, the capital infusion that we're talking about would tend to be spent on some of the smaller scale stuff, replacing an air conditioning system, radios, or what have you. So as you know from our master plan, we know we need to replace Lynch and Morocco. We have submitted statements of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. We submitted in April of 17. They basically said, thank you very much, you need to get back in line because we're not even done wrapping up with you on the high school. But we submitted again the following year. And if you haven't been following this in the paper, we submitted Lynch and Morocco, worked hard on both. The MSBA said, we'd like to come look at Lynch. We think you have a strong case. I will tell you that this year for their core replacement project, their core replacement program, they received some 80 submissions. They came to visit Lynch. Lynch was one of 28 potential projects that they visited. 28. Of those, half they had visited the year before. So the message was, just because they come to visit and look doesn't mean you're gonna pass, doesn't mean you're gonna get the nod by senior staff. Many districts, if you've been following what happened in Stoneham, I think Stoneham just got approval on their high school. I think they took a swing at that 5 or 6 years in a row to get that project through. I am very pleased and optimistic that the MSBA bit, if you will, on Lynch after just our second try. And I'm optimistic we may be even more successful next year. So, Susan, what that means is, if and when the MSBA says we'd like to partner with you on a reconstruction of Lynch or a Morocco, it would require that we enter into what we call a feasibility study. It's no commitment to actually rebuild a building. It's a design exercise, if you will. That would take about a year to year and a half. Once we determine what the building looks like, where does it go, how big is it, what would it cost, then we would go out to the voters for that debt exclusion override that I described. And the state would reimburse us some significant percentage for that construction. We don't know what that would be. At VO, it was almost 40, it was around 40%. And I think we turned out, Susan, on the high school with all the credits around 42, 43%. Is that right? So the state kind of paid a significant share of this beautiful building. So that's kind of how it works. I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't know next time we do this if the state's going to say we want to look at Lynch again, or do we want to look at Morocco. It'd be nice if they looked at both. Other questions or comments? Okay, so we have, do you have a question or comment? Okay. What I'd like to do, I'm going to quote, Lance, did you have something else you want to say real quick? I just want to give us some time to deliberate.
One note on the earlier question. State law is very rigid on overriding questions. Once the select board closes it, we cannot ask the town employees to campaign. We cannot ask the residents to go out and campaign on it. Or all of your elected officials can go out and shoot their mouths off the lawn. I say that because once we vote that, if you're interested in talking to any of us, they would select them in the small neighborhood school organization. We'd be more than happy to come out and explain what's going on and talk about the NLC. There's no restriction on the elected officials to come to this. So, the only restriction is we cannot use town resources to campaign for this.
Thank you, Lance. So what I'm going to do is close public comment, given the time, and open it up to my committee members to ask questions of the superintendent and share their thoughts. Judy, can I ask you just again to clarify tonight, so for everybody's benefit, what you've presented are some preliminary budgets in both scenarios, an override and an austerity scenario?
Right. So the override budget is a pretty significant increase, 8.46%, and that includes some deferred initiatives and some enrollment-related increases. The austerity budget of 3.8% will require some hard decisions about staffing reductions and fee increases or program elimination. So this is a preliminary budget because school committee members are looking for feedback on how the whole package gets put together. The most that we can spend is 3.8% more than we have spent this year. And how that lands is really a mixture of fee increases, program elimination, and layoffs. And so that's why it's a preliminary budget, because lots of decisions still have to be made on that front. I know some people came and need to leave, and I really just want to say before you go, I really appreciate your coming to listen tonight and giving up another night away from your kids, so thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to email, and I would be happy, or call, and I'll be happy to meet with anyone who has further questions.
Take up Stacy's invitation and go to Lynch. So may I suggest to the committee, can we perhaps start with the override or needs-based budget, the 8.46 increase in no particular order? I'm eager to hear what committee members think. Any questions for the superintendent?
Well, we have seen this before. We have seen an earlier version of this, and a number of the things that we're looking to do are things that we had talked about before and deferred, like But I had a question, sort of comparing the two. Judy, you were looking to add one elementary level teacher for enrollment growth, or to, at least provide for that if we needed to.
Right.
At the elementary level in this needs-based budget.
Mm-hmm.
And then that isn't really mentioned in the reduction budget. But am I correct in understanding that the reason you haven't mentioned adding that is because you're just starting from where we are now and reducing staff in the
Correct.
no override scenario?
Right, so the reduction budget doesn't add a single employee except for special education.
Okay.
So, should more students arrive at our doors, it just means larger class sizes.
Okay.
And to Susan's point, so the school committee had a couple of meetings on this budget in December as we were closing out the calendar year. And so what Judy describes tonight as being maybe deferred to 21 or 22, in fact, are initiatives we have talked about as a committee. So I think for this body, it's more about finding our comfort level in doing just that. Is there an appetite to sort of defer to a later year what we had originally talked about in 20? And again, to reiterate, this is very important. Any deferment towards 21 or 22 does not mean the amount of the override comes down. I hope everybody can appreciate that. The question in the spring, should one be placed on the ballot, is about raising the levy limit. That is the limit at which we can be taxed. That is not what a budget is. That's simply the ceiling under which we always work. The committees, department heads, the finance committee, and so forth. And so I think there's an attempt here on the part of the superintendent in hearing that some in our community, there's an appetite or a concern towards front-loading this too much from a budget point of view, and so there's a reaction towards that. It's the best explanation. Other questions for Judy tonight?
I'd like to follow up on Susan's and just clarify as well. We talked about with the override budget that some of the personnel requests at 6 through 8 would actually help us to reduce class sizes. And we talked about adding a new classroom teacher at elementary. Could we also clarify that that is going to maintain our already low class size guidelines at the elementary school?
Right, the override budget would keep our class sizes within the school committee targets, which are favorable at this point, all the way K through 5. No class over 22 at this point.
I have a question.
Tina?
Is this draft budget, the 3.8%, it does not contain any changes in fees?
It doesn't clarify exactly how we're going to add additional revenue through fees or what we're going to eliminate in the program. It just has a placeholder of about a 20% reduction in athletics, which could be accomplished through program cuts or through increased fees. It also eliminates the transportation to childcare after school, the additional buses. You could eliminate that or you could charge fees.
And then the override budget, it doesn't take away fees.
It doesn't take away fees, but it doesn't increase fees.
And Zena, your question reminds me of something also I wanted to mention, and that is with respect to that austerity budget. Just to clarify, it's kind of based on what we understand now. It's based on that free cash discussion the select board had last night. It's based on some understanding about revenue projections that they've received from the finance committee. If, in fact, the projection should change between, let's say, now and the spring override, or now and any time, now before town meeting, if in fact an austerity budget would find us with more than 3.8%, if it was 4%, if it was 4.2, I think some members of this committee want to have a discussion about, well, then what would be, if you will, held less harmless, right? So if we had an extra 0.2, if we had an extra 0.4, what would that mean? Would it mean fewer layoffs? Would it mean less program reductions? Would it mean fewer fee increases? So I've spoken with the superintendent about this, and I think the sense is that she would like to, if that should happen, if and when that should happen, she'd like to talk with the leadership team and get their input. So tonight it's really about, I want to be clear that if there's a motion and a vote tonight on an austerity budget, to be very clear, it's just based on the set of facts that we have tonight, which is partly why we call it a preliminary budget.
And is my understanding also correct that this is as low as we expect the austerity budget to go, or could it also go lower than the 3.8?
Well, I was
That's
going
a
to look
great
at Lance, but he's gone, and now I'm looking at Aaron.
And Aaron, it's
There was some discussion, I mean, the select board, I felt like they met 3 times yesterday, late into the night, and their decision, I think, came with some input or discussion with the finance committee. If you're so comfortable, Sam or Aaron, can we put some form of that question to you in terms of the input you've given the select board? Anything you want to say about maybe where that 3.8 comes from, assumptions around free cash that's being preserved?
Boring everyone who's still here with too much detail. Can you hear me okay? We talked about it all the time, and at fall town meeting, and kind of reiterating now, there's a certain policy that's put forth in terms of how much reserves we want to have as a town. Not getting into the technical definition of what those reserves are, there is an element of free cash associated with them, right? And we've had a lot of discussion over the past few weeks about how much actually we will end with at the end of FY19, which we're in right now, and then theoretically how much we would end with at the end of FY20. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of complex inputs, and it's not an exact science. But we looked at the number, and we came up with a number that I think everybody felt comfortable with, certainly within FinCom, and then also across the various boards. And so what this represents tonight is what the comfort level is right now. As Chris has highlighted, we're going to continue to look at that number. Things will change. Whether or not they change materially to impact what this budget is, I can't say. Yes, they could look better. I'm not going to say that theoretically they couldn't look a little bit worse. But we feel pretty good about where things are right now in terms of not necessarily what the outcome is, but feel pretty good about what the level looks like. Again, with a certain level of confidence.
Thank you, Aaron. And I just add that although there may be subtle changes in the different inputs into this process, I think we all collectively feel there is no chance that these inputs are going to change so wildly that a no vote means we're not looking at a cut budget. So the austerity budget is a cut budget. Whether it's 3.8, 3.7, or 4, or 4.1, there's still going to be some pain associated. Thank you, Aaron. Other questions or comments from the committee? We only have 2 at the table, so do what you like. So speaking to the mic.
So regarding the override budget, I just wanted clarification about the full day kindergarten days. That is full day, only because when I read what's in the presentation versus it says 3/4 day, I want to understand that is full day. Or are we phasing that in? I just want to understand.
Yeah, great question. So our intent is, our hope is, to have each kindergarten classroom have 1 teacher and 1 instructional assistant full-time. That's a pretty big increase in 1 year. So this override budget moves them to 3/4 time, and then in the following year, we hope to add the additional quarter and have them be full-time. So phasing it in over 2 years.
I may explore, so that's the nice budget, the austerity budget. Judy, if you could just speak to the very generally, if we're losing 15 to 18 positions, you sort of talked about generally where they would come from, generally, but could we expect some of those to be from attrition that we don't backfill, some of them, unfortunately, to be from layoffs, some combination there?
So, unfortunately, there isn't anyone in the district who, if he or she left, we wouldn't fill that position. Every position is providing essential services. However, one of the things that's complicated about layoffs in an environment where a contract determines the order because of seniority, in order to achieve your goal of reducing the budget by a certain dollar amount, sometimes you have to lay off more people than you want to. For example, if you lay off a teacher who is quite experienced, that teacher often can displace a less experienced teacher who makes significantly less, and you sometimes have to lay off 2 less experienced teachers in order to achieve your goal. And so that's why it's a range. We do have a few retirements. Most of them have already been built into the budget in terms of the savings, but some of those positions we might not replace, and that would help us to have fewer layoffs. But in general, if we have less than a 4% budget increase, there'll be double-digit layoffs. I can't foresee any circumstance under which we can reduce by $1 million without significant pain in terms of losing highly valued employees.
Thank you. Anything else, Brian? Michelle.
I was just gonna also just another clarifying question. So we haven't, as a committee, yet discussed what fees might be addressed by an austerity budget. But you did mention that in the austerity budget you put aside about a 20% reduction in athletics, and to replace that, you mentioned it would increase fees. Is that per year, per student? You said by about 50%.
So every decision has multiple consequences, and there are a lot of variables. So if we were to reduce our athletic budget by $100,000, you can accomplish that in a number of ways, and sometimes the impact is a domino effect. So if you were to reduce sub-varsity sports, some of those are less expensive to run than the varsity sports. We also bring in athletic fees for some of those students. You have to take into account the offsetting loss of those fees, and it required even cutting deeper. And we have a fee structure now where all students pay the same. Some of our sports are much higher cost than others. We could consider changing our fee structure. All of this is very upsetting because we have a terrific athletic program. We try to look, before we make a recommendation to cut any department or any program, we try to look at everywhere we can possibly go. And because we've had so many years where we've been very lean, we are very level funded in terms of our curriculum, professional development, technology. And so there aren't any areas where we can afford to have any cuts on the academic side. And so the only place we can go where we could offset cut is a fee-based program like athletics.
Anything else? Zena, I don't want to miss you. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Susan.
Another, since we're talking a lot about fees, I would like to give people parents a little more clarity around what the fee changes might be, but I don't have the sense that we have any real concrete numbers or proposal to do that now, or do we, Judy? We aren't suggesting that we're going to change any of our transportation fees for regular transportation. Okay.
The elimination of the after-school additional buses that we subsidize for about $115,000 after fees would require, if it were fully parent-funded, to increase the fee from something like $400 to $800 per student. I would suspect with athletics it would be similar. That we would see at least a doubling of the fee if we were not to see significant cuts. And so some of our parents are already paying thousands of dollars in fees. And this would be something that you would need to solicit feedback on from parents in the wider community to see whether the appetite is personnel reductions, larger class sizes, elimination of electives, not having high school students have the options that they currently have in terms of their coursework, or higher fees, or reduction of program. And so that's where we really need to get feedback and see what the will of the wider community is, because any of these cuts are going to hurt students and teachers and families. And so it's an unfortunate consequence of a structural deficit. We have known that this was coming, and it is something that we need to face and really give the citizens a voice in what kind of school district we want to have.
And just to be clear, oh, sorry, Susan, did you?
Well, I was just going to, as a kind of clarifying comment, just so everyone understands, like, in none of these areas do the fees right now pay the whole amount. They're paid for by a combination of town appropriated money and fee revenue. And what we're What you're not talking about doing is raising fees and then taking some of that money to pay for teachers. They're different pots entirely.
Exactly.
That's a great point. I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up, Susan. That's important.
And I was also going to clarify that those budgets, as you presented currently, do not raise fees in either scenario to fund what were presented here
As
tonight.
presented, right.
As presented tonight.
Yeah.
If we were going to examine raising fees, as Susan was suggesting, in an austerity scenario, that might be to offset the loss that we would have to experience because of the budget.
Exactly.
Thank you for clarifying.
And another sort of fundamental point is that when town meeting votes in May on the next year's operating budget, the school department, they vote a number, a bottom line, general number. They don't say, you can spend $400,000 on this use and $2 million on this. They just say, here's the bottom line number. So what we're developing here is, that bottom line number, which, you don't have to have a lot of precision around the fees.
Right. So really, the vote tonight is to submit 2 preliminary budgets to the town manager to pass on to the FinCom so that we can have those conversations. How we get to the increase of the austerity budget or the override needs budget is the subject of continued discussion over the coming weeks and months. But it was important for us to identify, particularly in relation to the personnel cuts, what the likely impact would be of an austerity budget, so that we can begin to have those hard discussions about making choices that have the least impact on students.
So the point that Susan just made, though, is it's interesting to underscore that flexibility we have, and she describes town meetings and gives us a lump of money, and we have flexibility. It's actually unique to schools, committees, and school districts in Massachusetts. We're the only ones with that flexibility. The rest of that yellow sheet I described, the town manager has to spend and manage their budgets throughout the year to each line item, whatever that may be. Our practice at the school committee is actually to come back in October after the start of the school year, after any kind of late retirements or maternity leaves are taken into account, right? We have some temporary teachers, and we actually do make some minor budget adjustments. So that kind of thing will continue to happen. I think what becomes critical to that is you don't change fees in October, right? So because families need to know, certainly our department heads need to know, our athletic director needs to know, because we're going to advertise, for instance, for fall sports. Parents are registering their kids for fall sports in August. So we have to figure that out in advance. And bus passes. Bus pass applications, I think, are due for a discount in June, right? And then get it in July otherwise. So, am I close? Yeah. So out of fairness to families, there's still a lot we got to figure out. We don't know what we're going to do at the start of school. So it is, we're actually up on 8:30.
I just wanted to
go ahead.
one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just don't want to leave on the austerity budget. I also just want to reiterate, since we talked a lot about personnel, the personnel that we're adding in an override budget is not all due to program improvement, but due to our enrollment growth. So the personnel that we're adding, Judy, Dr. Evans, is actually necessary staff. It's areas that we really need to maintain class size, to maintain the options that we have now, as well as the small.
Right. Lots of high-performing districts don't have study halls at all. Our middle school students sit in study hall, and I would like to offer them the option to take the class. And it is enrollment related because they wouldn't be sitting in study halls if we had enough staff to offer programs that they are interested in taking. Similarly, at the high school, there are students who would like to take more classes, and there are no classes for them to take. There's no room for them in existing classes or sections because we have insufficient teachers. So there's sort of a pent-up demand that we haven't been able to fulfill. We've only filled the very minimum number of enrollment-related increases that were necessary to keep the ship afloat and to keep our class sizes reasonable K-5. And so a lot of that is kind of pent-up demand, you're right. if we can improve our programs at the same time by creating a program like Performing Arts or expanding world language, that is also a tremendous benefit to our students and programs.
Thank you. So it's 8:30. If there are no more questions or comments, I'm happy to entertain a motion on one or both of the preliminary budgets that Judy's presented.
Okay, so I move that we approve the superintendent's proposed needs-based budget in the amount of $54,527,997 as the preliminary fiscal year 2020 school department budget, contingent upon a town election approving Proposition 2.5 override, and that we approve the superintendent's proposed reduction or austerity budget of $52,178,213 as the budget for fiscal year 2020 in the event that a Proposition 2.5 override is not approved.
Second.
Two budgets in one motion. That's good. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. I'm gonna ask, is there a motion to adjourn a public hearing? Our high school representative Evan is here. He's on our agenda tonight. We have some other business to take into account. If we can adjourn our public hearing, we can take a couple of minutes to invite him forward, grab our resources for the next meeting. Those of you who want to stay, you're welcome. Others, feel free to leave. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we'll call our regular meeting over here in just a couple of minutes.